years after international combat troops end operations in 2014. The key words that we heard from the Afghan Foreign Minister Zalmay Rasul in the closing press conference were mutual accountability, that both sides are saying that they'll do things. The international community will put this money in, but there are conditions attached that the Afghan government has to improve its track record on corruption and has to improve accountability mechanisms to international funders. The other important thing that Afghanistan got out of this was the agreement of the international community to meet again in 2 years' time at a senior level summit. That meeting will be in London in order to consider progress on this, and some hope to then to commit to another 4 years. So you have commitments made into the future for the funding period after 2014.
So they made many promises about how to tackle corruption. They've said that before, though, haven't they, David?
Well, that's been one of the big issues. I think, there's going to be an important change, though, in the years to come. The kind of aid that Afghanistan receives is going to be of a less corrupt sort, if you follow my drift. Much of the aid that Afghanistan has received until now has gone outside state mechanisms. It's been a corrupting force all of its own. The World Bank's been highly critical of it. They talk about an aid juggernaut that's descended on Afghanistan, building a sort of parallel state rather than standing up the Afghan state. What the good donors, the European Union, Britain in particular, are hoping for in the years to come is that it's not just the amount of aid, but the quality and effectiveness of aid that Afghanistan receives, so that it goes through mechanisms that are seen to be not corrupt, such as the Afghanistan Reconstruction Trust Fund, which the international community believe is not a corrupting mechanism, and through which the state will be able to build up its services rather than just put money into the pockets of elites, which, you're right, has happened far too often in the past.
Now, David, you're in Kabul. Is there a sense at all from people there that they should be able to stand on their own 2 feet eventually?
Well, I think that's optimistic. Afghanistan's never really stood on its own 2 feet, and it remains one of the poorest countries in the world. There's a real weariness. I mean, people talk about a donor fatigue, that the donors are sort of bored of giving money to Afghanistan. There's a real weariness here of the international community. It's gone on a long time, this very large foreign presence. In the villages, in the countryside, when you talk to people there, they're sceptical. They don't see real changes to their lives. But, in some places there are real changes. In Bamiyan in the centre, things are different to what they were before. In Herat in the west, a lot of customs money comes in there. That feels like a functioning Central Asian city, as does Mazar-e-Sharif in the north, where the lights are on all the time. It's a very safe place to travel around. There's a railway line going up to the border, and a sense of a different future, of an economically stable future. Although in the wings, we've heard this morning, a major bomb attack in Kandahar, a double bomb attack, killing 14 people, 5 of them women, apparently targeted at innocent civilians. So the war goes on despite these hopes for settlement and economic security in the future.
And that was David Loyne in Kabul. A video has been released which appears to show the Afghan Taliban publicly executing a woman in a village about 100 kilometres from Kabul. She was shot dead after reportedly being accused of adultery. The short video shows a woman with her head covered, sitting on the ground as a man opens fire. She's then shown lying motionless. A crowd of more than 100 men watches. Some cheer. Officials in Parwan province say the video was made a week ago. Well, now to Mexico, where supporters of the runner-up in last Sunday's presidential election, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, are refusing to accept the official results of the poll. Tens of thousands took to the streets of Mexico City on Saturday, claiming the victory of Enrique Peña Nieto had been secured by large-scale vote buying and fraud. Mr. Nieto's party, the PRI, governed the country for 71 years until voted out of office in the year 2000. From Mexico City, Will Grant reports.
The protesters' message was clear and uncompromising. Peña out. In their tens of thousands in the historic centre of Mexico City, they also chanted Mexico without PRI and held up banners carrying the word fraud in a collective rejection of the presidential election result. Those who have turned out are a broad spread of interest groups and organisations. They include labour unions and the large student-led anti-Peña Nieto movement known as I Am 132. But there are also lots of people who simply think the election process was neither free nor fair. They accuse the party of Mr. Peña Nieto of buying votes using supermarket gift cards and of preying on the high levels of poverty in the country to gain power. The PRI deny having paid for votes and say they have acted strictly within the law, but that's unlikely to convince these voters.
There was a lot of fraud. There was vote buying, and it's a pity that people continue to let themselves be bought for just a few hundred pesos or some groceries.
There's so much evidence, videos, recordings, people coming forward to testify that different parties purchased their votes. They also tampered with votes. This is fraud.
In the meantime, there is still a legal process underway over the final result. The second-place candidate, the left-wing former mayor of Mexico City, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, has made it very clear he intends to fight the electoral body all the way to the Supreme Court. Even if Mr. Peña Nieto is eventually named president, Mr. López Obrador wants to make the process of taking office as complex as possible.
Will Grant in Mexico City. A court in the United States has ruled that interviews given by a former IRA bomber to academic researchers should be handed over to the police in Northern Ireland. Boston College had been refusing to release the interviews with Dolores Price. She was convicted for her involvement in a bomb attack nearly 40 years ago on London's Central Criminal Court, the Old Bailey. 200 people were injured in the blast. Chris Page reports from Belfast.
Around 10 years ago, researchers at Boston College ran an oral history project in which they interviewed members of paramilitary groups in Northern Ireland. The interviewees took part on condition that the material would not be published until after they died. But the Police Service of Northern Ireland asked for the transcript of the interviews with Dolores Price, who was part of the IRA gang which exploded a bomb at the Old Bailey in 1973. She was released from prison on health grounds in 1981. The police said their request related to the investigation into the murder of Jean McConville, one of the so-called disappeared, who was killed and buried in a secret location 40 years ago. Researchers argued that handing over the document would harm the peace process in Northern Ireland and endanger the lives of people who took part in the project. But a US appeal court has ruled the transcript should be released. The judge said the choice to investigate criminal activity belonged to the government and was not subject to veto by academic researchers. Boston College is also taking legal action to try to stop the handover of 7 other interviews with IRA members.
Chris Page in Belfast. New York is due to become the latest big city to launch a bike-sharing scheme at the end of this month, joining the ranks of London, Paris and Washington, D.C. Over the next year, a total of 10,000 bikes will be made available for hire at hundreds of new stands across the city. Matt Wells reports from one of the locations in downtown Manhattan.
In just a few weeks' time, this island between 2 busy lanes of traffic will be home to 30 new bikes for hire. The bright blue city bikes, as they're known, after the Wall Street giant Citibank, which is sponsoring most of the scheme, are designed for short rides around town of up to 45 minutes. It's the first public bike share programme anywhere to be funded entirely by private enterprise, and it's being championed by New York's billionaire mayor and his transportation department.
It's going to be 10,000 bikes at 600 stations around the city, including actually right here where we're standing.
In the run-up to the launch, so-called bike ambassadors from the cycling advocacy group Transportation Alternatives have been getting New Yorkers used to the idea of what's coming. Executive Director Paul Steely-White says the bikes will soon be as visible as the city's famous yellow cabs.
We're already seeing a very strong shift in bike culture towards the mainstream. I mean, historically it's been more of a fringe activity. You have to be very brave to ride your bike on the streets of New York. That has changed markedly in the past few years with so many more bike lanes.